Albano, and I'm the Associate Director for Parent and Family Programs here at the UCLA Alumni Association. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like Alumni Day possible. We're so grateful for your support. And I do want to remind everyone watching that today's discussion is meant to be interactive. So go ahead and throw those questions into the live chat and we'll get to as many as we can throughout the day. I'm so excited this hour to be exploring activism in education, specifically as it pertains to advocating for low-income families in Los Angeles as they support their students' educational pursuits. And to do this, I'm also very excited to welcome Maisie Chin. Maisie is the Executive Director and co-founder of Community Asset Development Redefining Education, or CADRE, a South Los Angeles parent organizing center that supports low-income African-American and Latino parents to become leaders in stopping the push-out or dropout crisis in public schools. Maisie has been in the social justice movement for 25 years, dedicating her life to fighting structural racism and oppression. Maisie is a proud double Bruin, having earned her bachelor's degree in history in 1993 and her master's in urban planning in 1997. Maisie, thank you so much for being with us today, and we're so grateful to have you. If you could, we'd love for you to start off our conversation by just telling us a little more about yourself and how you got into the work you're doing today.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. I am a very proud Bruin, and so I'm really excited to be able to talk about how I have utilized what I got from UCLA to try to improve this world that we live in. And so I got there really just trying to figure out a way to make sense of the world as a child of immigrant parents and working class parents, and the cultural shifts and things in this country that make it very easy to feel marginalized. And so, throughout UCLA, I was searching for that sense of my purpose and what I'm supposed to do in this world, especially with this privilege of an education. And in the end, after graduating in 1993, I was able to be blessed with a chance to work on education issues, and I've been doing it ever since. And I would just say that, I always was very, very passionate about fairness. That really came from my parents, and also, but what I saw in the world, it was really hard to reconcile. So I have been a constant seeker of truth and fairness from day one, and here I am.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So our first question for you today is, what are some of the biggest educational challenges facing families in underserved Los Angeles communities?
Well, I'm going to say a few things that might be off the norm a little bit. I think most people read the papers, or they absorb the news or on social media and see that there are a lot of things going on with our education system. And but in low-income communities in particular, I want to say that it is really beyond just giving people access. It is actually the culture of our institutions that makes it very difficult for people who are marginalized or who haven't been part of the mainstream power structure to survive and to be in the system and to thrive. And so, whether it's pre-K all the way to high school, and certainly in community college or four-year universities, there's a culture that you have to be able to ascribe to in order to succeed in education in this country. And in many ways, we don't spend enough time explaining that. And so we do a lot of time, access, we push for access. And a lot of people have been very soldiers about keeping people in school. But I think we don't often talk about what that really means to acclimate to the culture of education in this country. And a lot of times immigrant families, families with first generation students, low-income families who are seeking better outcomes for their children, we need to break down that cultural barrier, because it isn't just getting into college or getting in or graduating from high school. It really is understanding how to get an education in this country.
Got it. So not just about getting to that point, like what that means more broadly and what that looks like for students even beyond that initial jump.
And I would say that a lot of us who've gotten into college, we think that it's about all these steps. But I would challenge us to think about the fact that if we were able to get through school, what were the things that really allowed us to navigate And when people aren't able to navigate that, you know, do we judge them and we think, oh, they need to be more like us, or do we actually look at the broader, you know, just whether or not people actually haven't had the benefits that we've had? So.
Absolutely. So that actually is a great lead off into the next thing I'm really curious about. So what are some of those common assumptions about low income families that really need to be dismantled in order for us to be able to create opportunities in these communities?
Well, given the work that I do right now, that I've been doing for almost 2 decades, I would say that the stereotypes, they're often very racialized, but there's a general stereotype that if you're low income, that somehow you didn't get yourself out of that situation, and therefore, you know, you might not care about education as an extension of that. And I actually fundamentally believe that's false. I believe that most families and parents are doing the absolute best they can, and if their entire family has been in poverty for 2 to 3 generations or been segregated for 2 to 3 generations, it isn't about caring. It is literally about having to change the entire system that you're living in. And if you can't do that, you're going to do the best you can with the system that you're living in and surviving in. And in many cases, the system is not providing any opportunity, any way out of poverty, any long-term jobs, any long-term income security or housing security or food security. So when we take it all into consideration, I'm really calling on us to assume the best of parents instead of the worst, just because they're low income or just because they didn't go to school.
And so with CADRE, you're kind of standing in the gap for those families, right? And providing them that partnership to be able to do that. Can you talk a little bit more about that specifically?
So when CADRE started forming almost 20 years ago, meeting in living rooms on Friday nights, a lot of the parents that started CADRE with me were those involved parents. They were from South Central, but they went to all the meetings, they did all the conferences and the trainings, but it didn't prevent their children from being discriminated against or mistreated, primarily because of their race or stereotypes about who they were. And so it really just changed what I understood about even parent involvement. And I think it challenged the parents as well. Like, okay, we did all this and it still doesn't keep our kids on this track of success. And so the gap that we're in is really looking at, again, what I mentioned earlier, just like if there's a whole system of schooling that just hasn't figured out how to educate en masse people who are low income or who've been through a lot of trauma or been through poverty for several generations, it isn't a personal individual responsibility issue. It is actually a systemic one. And many things that parents experience, they're told that it's their fault or that they are not doing something correctly or that it's, you know, they're to blame. And then they, you know, parents internalize that, and we have our self-fulfilling prophecies. You know, it's just like with young people, the same thing happens with children. So in many ways, we have to actually look at parents as human beings and not view them as just people that we need to do good transactions with to get to the kids. We actually need to understand parents' stories and what they struggle with, what their experiences were like with schools. And you will likely find, as I did, that when you listen to those stories with compassion instead of judgment, you will find that how parents are involved at any point is often part of a much bigger story, and it isn't because they don't care about education. And then what we do is we listen for the resilience, and we listen for the survival, and we listen for the power and the leadership that's still there that just hasn't been tapped, and we try to bring it out so that parents can be reconnected to their sense of agency and, you know, their ability to make changes for their children.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about that. So we do have our first live question from Rex. Rex says, accessibility and inclusivity for the marginalized communities play a key role in defining and redefining spaces in education. So with that said, what challenges do you see arising in the next 3 to 5 years around that part of this issue?
Well, I would say that what we mean and how we define inclusivity is probably going to be very, very important. I think we often think of inclusivity in a token way, like, okay, I'm sitting at this table, although this table is not defined by me. I have to play by these other rules that aren't determined by me. And so many times we actually have to change the tables that we're sitting at, or the rooms that we're sitting in, and the institutions that we're a part of. And if we just focus on sort of representation without really grappling with what people need to feel whole in these, in these institutions. So in other words, what they need to feel whole, like they can thrive in school or in a four-year university or in a workplace, in a nonprofit organization, in a place of business, we have to grapple with more than just representation. I think we are trying to take a quick fix to racism in this country by just looking at the demographics. But when we don't look at the culture, whether or not we actually have an inclusive culture, and whether people who aren't part of the mainstream get to fully be who they are without punishment or retaliation, we're only going to go so far.
Absolutely. We have another live question from Gil. If there was one policy you could change in Los Angeles that would enhance the school system in the city, what would it be?
Okay, so this is going to be also a little bit off the beaten path here. And I'm saying this not at the expense of other policies. So this is more like a both and approach. It's not trying to say, oh, replace those policies with this one. So when I suggest that one thing that our system needs to do is actually focus on centering parents in the schools, which is very different because most people want to center the students, and they should, and we should. I'm talking about both and approach, that we don't view parents as just messengers and conveyors, and transactors, that we actually ask for our schools to be community institutions that actually understand their families that they serve, and then they go about educating their children. So there's a lot of movement around things like community schools, but what I would push us to do is actually have a specific practice that brings parents in, parents of the students who are struggling the most, who school staff may want to kick out, those parents, and we actually work with the parents who are the most marginalized and find out their story and use those stories to help raise the whole school up, instead of focusing on the top and wondering and trying to figure out how the bottom doesn't fall out. I think we need to utilize the struggle and make things better for everybody as a result. I don't know if that's a clear policy, but I can name policies related to that, but I'm just trying to give an idea, an approach that I think would open our eyes to lots of ways that we could fix that.
No, I think that's great. And I guess my follow-up question for you on that would be, do you see schools already being receptive to this in your work? How is that looking as it currently stands?
That's a good question, actually. I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be. Unfortunately, we're still at a place where to be quote unquote a good parent or a good involved parent, there's kind of a code you have to practice. And if you deviate from that code, you can often bring a lot of, backlash onto yourself. So things like questioning critically, whether not just the budget and how things are spent, but even the instructional practices or the treatment, the subjective treatment of students or of parents themselves. And if there's any sort of commentary about those things get defensive and combative very quickly. So to me, there is not yet a place short of a straight up protest, but there's not sort of a regular day-to-day capacity to deal with people's, yes, there may be complaints and grievances, but what's underneath all that? What is really the thing that's going on? And so a lot of times we don't have a way to air out, differences, and then the relationships just continue to be strained. And so it's kind of to my earlier point, if we view schools as places to where the school sites are actually places to sort of resolve community conflict and tensions, and part of being a good principal or a good teacher was really actually having good relationships with the parents as much as anything else. And what I would like to add is that we need to turn that into a practice. It's not just a good feeling and a personality. What we're doing here at CADRE is pretty much a practice of how to engage parents with dignity and respect. And we'd like to see our school staffs practicing some of what we do here.
Absolutely. So as you know, I work with parents and families at UCLA. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about is just this engagement of families at the K through 12 level. How do you believe that influences the persistence of first generation college students once they're through the K through 12 system and going into their undergraduate years?
Yeah, well, the one thing that we strive to have our parents experience while they're with us at CADRE and at the K-12 level is how to think critically about what they're going through as part of history in a system that is not purely personal, and that their experience is part of a larger set of experiences many people have. If that is understood, then you can begin to really learn the policies, the resources that are available to you as you advocate, as you're advocating for yourself or as you're advocating for your child. And if that can be learned before going into college, as we all know, once you're in college, you're all on your own. And if you've never had the chance to think about college as a system that you're navigating, and people are just pushing you to get into college and just get in, but then we don't understand the system that we're in, we often fall through the cracks. And so the hope is that when our parents advocate for their children in K through 12 level, they're role modeling for their children in a completely different way than the children have ever seen. You know, they're seeing their parents look at data. They're seeing their parents understand policies. They're hearing their parents debate policies. You know, they're hearing their parents be able to talk about history and how to talk to another parent that, you know what, this isn't all your fault. This is part of a big systemic problem. And when parents can talk to each other like that, we hope that their children learn how to talk and relate to each other like that. So.
Right. Earlier, you talked a little bit about your own journey, your previous experience with your family, and we have a question from Julie. She wants to know, how has your own educational experience influenced your journey and where you are now?
So I'm also going to say a few unconventional things, which is that actually my own experience of going through school and having working class parents who worked graveyard and swing shift, which my mom did. And so after, I don't know, maybe elementary school, when she started going to night school, it wasn't like, you know, the open houses and the parent teacher conferences. Those weren't always possible. But at the same time, nobody penalized me or viewed me differently because my mom didn't come to a meeting. And when I started working in schools in Watts, all I would hear is about how the parents didn't come to open house in these very disparaging ways, as if there was no question, no inquiry, like what could have been the issue, what might have caused that to happen. It was just this broad sweep assumption that, oh, parents aren't going to come. And yes, they didn't, but it always felt like the behavior of the parents then sort of justified if they became, if they just stopped caring about the kids as well and teaching them. And so that because that never happened to me, and yet I did have a working class family, I just felt that, okay, so what is this about? This has to be about racial stereotypes. And because of the model minority and the model minority stereotype, it felt like, okay, there's something going on here that isn't fair. And whether my parents came to a school meeting or not, it didn't affect, how people perceived my family. But it was literally used as a justification for sort of not caring about African-American Latino families. So I hope this makes sense to folks. It's not something that people talk about a lot, and I'm really trying to talk about it.
Kevin would like to know if there's a success story you can share about a time when parents have engaged and how that might have significantly impacted their student experience and process.
Absolutely. We've had some parents involved in our work that once they knew their rights, not just their civil rights, but their human rights, and they understood that, being blocked at being blocked from advocating for your child as a rights violation, and that most parents feel entitled to advocate for their children as vociferously and as passionately as they want to. But in places like South Central, that was often met with schools often calling the police on parents or demeaning parents and trying to suppress their voices. And so, it takes a while to take that, what one of our parents, Rosalind Broadnax, always says, that sort of misplaced anger, and turn it into strategic, engagement of school staff. And so we've had parents prevent their nieces and nephews and children from being suspended because they understood the policy that we had won, that there was more behavioral support that should have been provided. And had that child been suspended, she might not have ever come back to school. It was that kind of a situation. And then we have parents who, during the time when the high school exit exam was utilized to keep kids from graduating, and there was not enough notice, and oftentimes people weren't told what their recourses were, this parent, because of her training at CADRE, knew how to fight back and make sure that her son still got a degree. A lot of times these advocacy moments are based on there not being a lot of information, and schools not making sure that parents understand the information that is sent home. And as we all know, a lot of this information is very technical, and most of us would not understand what it means. And I think in other schools that are in more affluent communities, it is expected that the parents will fight back and push back and demand that their children graduate. But for, obviously for other reasons, for many reasons, that is looked down upon here.
So quite literally, you have empowered families to keep their students from being suspended and from not even being able to continue that K through 12 journey, let alone get to college. Wow, that's awesome. Julie is really curious about the impact of the current state of politics. How do you see the midterm elections affecting education? What is this going to look like for us?
Well, I'm sure folks have been following the news the last year and a half, 2 years or so. And what CADRE has been honored to be a part of is a movement to end what's known as the school to prison pipeline. In our case, we focus on school discipline, but this whole movement also focuses on schools becoming safe places. But by safe, we mean culturally safe, emotionally safe, places where people can talk about what they're going through, especially when they don't have housing, or they're dealing with abuse, or they're dealing with trauma. School cultures and climates that actually know how to support students. So I'm sure everybody has seen that with school shootings, people have often responded with militarizing our schools, but be it with, random searches, metal detectors, more police on campus, empowering police to sort of be the counselors and all of that at a school campus. And obviously our current administration has basically unraveled all of the things that we achieved over the past 8 years as far as transforming school climates and trying to make them more positive and human-centered. And so the current administration, if it is still in place for longer, they have obviously proposed to arm teachers with guns, and they have proposed to beef up law enforcement presence on campuses. But the irony is that that often takes place the most severe degree in low-income communities of color, and not the communities where the school shootings actually take place. And so for us in particular, there's that major piece in education policy that is being fueled by the current administration. And we don't have the numbers to stop it because it's all being done by executive order or through the Department of Education.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So CADRE really seems to focus on advocating alongside families rather than solely advocating on their behalf. How does this model of empowerment really advance the pursuit of justice as a whole?
Well, I think it goes back to what I talked about, that we can't just fight for access and just get people in, that we have to be able to change the cultures of our institutions so people can can thrive. But in order to do that, we actually need more people to have the capacity to negotiate and to problem solve in order to change the culture of an institution. And so in many ways, we're tapping into this sort of this fire that often gets squashed, and we often are we're trying to create the conditions where our parents can be the critical thinkers, the strategists, the facilitators, because we believe if they learn that on the way to advocating for their child, that this will actually transform the community. So it isn't just about changing the transactions that parents go through for their children. It's actually helping them build a community with each other as parents, so that, and then their ability to be in relationship with one another is actually community development. And it's not just educational advocacy, but it's also community building, community development, community transformation.
So bringing this back to our Bruin community here, all around the world, why do you believe the Bruin community specifically is really uniquely equipped to help dismantle inequitable education systems and the way they're really racially divided and focused right now?
Well, I hope everybody knows, but if folks don't, we have a long history of social activism on our campus. And even now, today, if you go, just about every nonprofit, including obviously large institutions, if you peel back a layer, if they're not visibly a Bruin, at the top running the show, if you peel back a couple layers, there's Bruins all over the place, innovating, problem solving, bringing an extra gear to their work and really looking out for issues of equity and inclusion and justice. And so I feel very honored to have gone to UCLA and been part of this tradition. And I do believe we run the town and run the city in that way. If there's someone trying to do good, there's probably a Bruin behind it. So in many ways, I think it's just really embracing the legacy, and that the education we get at UCLA it allows us to be critical thinkers, and we have an obligation to be problem solvers as a result. And I think that we are just standing on the shoulders of many courageous alums who have done this for years.
We have another live question from Alex. Are there programs or organizations like CADRE in other cities? And if not, do you have an interest in scaling this to other communities in need?
Wow, Alex, that's a very good question. So I would say that people have asked. They've certainly asked me to do that. And we've never been able to sort of envision that just yet. But we are getting there. I would say that there are other groups around the country that do work with parents. What you'll be hard pressed to find is a group that solely works with parents. There's a few of us around the country. Most organizations, they work mainly with young people, and there's a parent program. In our case, we just work with parents. And so everything that people bring to bear on youth development, we would bring to bear on adult learning, adult development, and to support our parents as adult learners and transformers, if you will. So we are just on the cusp of sort of figuring out what our framework is, if you will. And I think within a year or two, we might be able to help other people start cadres around the country. So.
Look forward to being able to have this conversation and see how far it's come in just 5 years, even what the work you're going to do. But we will wrap up with just a couple questions left. And the first one is really about you. What ignites your passion for furthering CADRE's mission each day? It's obviously work that is very near and dear to you, but also really tough work. So what is leading that passion for you?
Well, what's funny is I think people, assume that I have children, and I have spent 2 decades trying to build CADRE. So I actually end up not having children, but the passion is bigger than that. My passion is racial justice. And I believe that my purpose has been to focus on that, and in particular, sort of dismantling the things that keep us from being able to build solidarity with one another. Again, my passion for fairness and people not feeling other or marginalized has always been my passion. So, but I feel like how our society treats parents of color, parents who are low income, parents who don't talk or look a certain way, is really a huge manifestation of our injustices, and we just often ignore it. And so, you know, I was able to find my sense of purpose with all the access and the opportunities I had through UCLA. And, you know, I feel like it's my obligation to redistribute my privilege and not just bring other people with me, but change the systems that we're living in. So.
All right. Well, we have a message for you, actually, from Roger Lee.
I know.
I don't know if you remember me, but I was part of the inaugural class of the AmeriCorps Public Allies in Los Angeles. Just want to say thank you for continuing to do great work in our communities.
Hey, Roger. Glad you made it to UCLA and are an alum now.
So awesome. All right, so our last question, it's going to be a combination of a live question and then one that I have for you. So Kevin wants to know, if you had to pick one tip for parents, what would it be? And then alongside that, if you had advice to give fellow Bruins who really want to engage in social justice work, what would that be? So advice for parents and advice for some Bruins who want to engage.
Again, I'm going to go off the beaten path here because it's not what you would expect. But given the work that we do at CADRE, I feel like when I have seen the most beautiful things happen with our parents is when they actually stop judging each other and stop judging themselves. And I know it's kind of a touchy-feely answer, but it's actually very structural in the way that I look at it, and that you know, parents are often going solo. They're often lone rangers. They're often competing with one another. There's a lot of judgment, and that really fractures our ability to come together as a community and to utilize our resources. And you know, not in reaction to a big crisis, but just all along the way. And a lot of times we just don't have the relationships between families to sort of take advantage of, you know, all of our assets. And so in many ways, you know, and of course this comes from a whole journey that I've had in understanding how difficult parenting is, and knowing that it causes a lot of things to happen if parents are not whole. And so I think we need to pay just as much attention to our parents as we do to young people's development. And as far as students and alum wanting to get involved, I don't know, LA is full. LA is like a laboratory of the best and the worst that our society has. And there are a lot of organizations and entities out here trying to solve problems. And I would say that, you know, find a problem that you're passionate about and find your lane and find your one contribution. You don't have to solve every problem. You don't have to solve the biggest level of the problem that you're passionate about. Just sometimes it's almost like being surgical, like being a doctor, where, you know, you're a specialist in a very particular problem. And a lot of times we don't ask ourselves to be specialists, and we just want to solve everything overnight. But if we allow ourselves to figure out what's the one problem that we're really passionate about solving and really get good at that, that can make a life fighting for social justice a lot more livable and less overwhelming. And we do need a lot of people to be problem solvers at this point. So I encourage everybody to do that.
A wonderful call to action for folks at home. All right, we have one more request of you before we close. Julie wants to know if you could read the quote behind you.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to turn around a little bit, but it says, "A woman in harmony with her spirit is like a river flowing. She goes where she will without pretense and arrives at her destination prepared to be herself and only herself." I hope that made your day, Julie.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to wrap up. Maisie, thank you so much for being with us, and for sharing your insights and just everything that you're doing to make LA better for our families. We've heard a lot about your work, you know, with advocacy, with social justice. It's not even just about an education system. It's so much broader than that. And the way you've woven all that together is really inspiring. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for listening and receiving it all. And absolutely go Bruins.
Go Bruins, yes. So for our folks at home who are watching, don't forget that you can check out all of the recordings from all of today's discussions on the UCLA Alumni YouTube channel. So if you missed any part of this or just want to watch it again, you're definitely welcome to do so. And we do want to thank one more time our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making days like today possible. So thanks again to everyone for joining. Thank you, Maisie, and go Bruins.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.